Of all the film series out there, Star Wars has always been my absolute favorite, and I've never felt stranger walking out of a movie than I did after seeing Rogue One. I was very excited for this movie because it had so much potential to expand the Star Wars universe in new ways, while also bringing back the classic aesthetic that fans know and love. And, it didn't really do that. Honestly, I kind of understand why people feel the way they do about the other Star Wars prequels. Rogue One is nowhere near as bad as the other prequels, but while I was watching it, I just felt this constant, underwhelming feeling, and I walked away from the film feeling pretty disappointed. So why did Rogue One fall so flat? Well, there are a lot of reasons. The biggest problem I have with this film is that it doesn't really have characters, at least not ones that demand any investment. Jyn Erso is one of the blankest slates I've seen in a long time, and a lack of personality doesn't really make for a good protagonist. Rogue One had a golden opportunity to explore moral grayness with these characters, but it never did.
If you continue to fight, what will you become?
That is a compelling question, but that line isn't in the final movie, and no ethical questions like that are ever really brought up. Because our heroes are pretty much terrorists, making them likable was kind of key, and if not likable, at least compelling. There are characters who are portrayed as being cold, efficient, and willing to kill to survive, and characters who have defected from the enemy, but the film never addresses these things as conflicts. Character consistency is almost non-existent in Rogue One, as most of the characters go from loners and outcasts to best friends and teammates over the course of a scene or two. There aren't any moments where we see them bond or get to know each other, or we learn some tragic backstory that gives the characters some sympathy to the audience. The characters dislike each other, and then they don't. The only character who has any real personality is K2SO. You know, the only one who isn't a human. And then there's Chirrut and Baze, who were included to appeal to the Chinese market, I guess. What's missing from these characters is a sense of passion. They're supposed to be the underdog fighting impossible odds, but they never act like they're facing a challenge. There's no fear, no hesitation, no one ever has a moment where they seem believably inspired or driven. Say what you want about The Force Awakens, at least the characters there had personality, there was some levity to them, and the main characters underwent personal journeys. Every main character in Rogue One is brooding and then dies, and that's about it. Everyone says that this movie is dark because the tone is slightly more somber than the other films, and because characters die at the end. Tonally, this movie really isn't that far off from the rest of the Star Wars movies, it's just so emotionally dry that it feels darker. I think that Hope itself could be considered a character more than any of the crew because every character talks about hope or uses it to describe things, and the last word spoken in the movie is hope. Yeah, hope, I get it, I understand the connection. But this movie isn't hopeful, it's depressing, and not in the dramatic way that it's trying to be. It's just devoid of liveliness. Despite that, Rogue One is full of forced attempts at emotion, and none of it ever rings true. Maybe the team would have functioned better if there were fewer characters, because that would allow time for more personality. If these characters had personality, maybe I would care if they accomplished their goal. Oh wait, I know that they accomplish it because A New Hope exists. The only thing that Rogue One had to do as a film was justify its own existence by telling a compelling story that might actually be able to create some tension as to whether or not the rebels would succeed, and it couldn't even do that. When prequel stories are done right, they can create a sense of tension about events that we already know, but I never worried about what the outcome of Rogue One would be because I never cared about these characters. And I really should have cared about them because their only purpose is to die. And if you think that characters don't need to be developed because they're going to die, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Characters dying doesn't automatically make a movie darker or more dramatic, and in Rogue One, it really just kinda happens. Since Rogue One is technically supposed to be a war film, there should at least be some tension about who's going to live or die, but it's all It's meaningless, it's nothing. And that's a real shame because the action scenes in this movie are pretty well crafted, but it all could have been so much more impactful if the characters were equally as well crafted. The action is certainly cool to watch, but it's just cool, not exciting or compelling, and the more personal moments with the main crew weren't nearly as enjoyable as just watching all-out battle. It's like watching a game of Battlefront unfold. It's entertaining, but you're not particularly invested in it. Nobody suffers, nobody has a standout moment, there's never a sense that the characters are facing impossible odds, and on top of all that, the sacrifice of these characters isn't done by their own volition. Nobody ever gives up and lets themselves die for the cause, they're just killed. The only character who distinctly sacrifices themselves to help the rebel cause is K2SO. Again, not a human, and everyone else, pretty much every character, dies from an explosion. Just a big burst of light, no pain, no suffering, they're just dead. If Rogue One wanted to be a gritty war movie, which it kind of touts itself as, it needed to commit to that idea. The film doesn't really do anything new, it's just less uplifting, and so it's less enjoyable as a Star Wars film. You probably didn't notice, but I haven't even mentioned the primary antagonist of the film yet. Krennic is actually the worst character of them all, and a terrible waste of Ben Mendelsohn. Rogue One takes so many incredible actors and just wastes them, completely wastes them. Krennic is entirely devoid of any character or any competence, and the only real reason he's there is so there's a new character on the Empire side who can interact with CGI Grand Moff Tarkin and Darth Vader. Krennic's interactions with other characters is another big problem with Rogue One. The references to A New Hope are so awkwardly included. There is absolutely no reason for Darth Vader to be in this movie. It's cool to see him on screen again, I guess, and he was always going to be a part of this story in this time period, but would it have killed the writers to make him a relevant or necessary part? Vader could be completely removed from the story and it would change nothing, and that final scene where he goes all Jason Voorhees on the rebel soldiers is the prime example of that. The scene is only there to make fanboys cheer because Darth Vader's killing people and we've never seen that before. Woohoo. Maybe it's because Darth Vader isn't really a character who's taken that seriously anymore. So the filmmakers had to make up a reason for him to be there, to try to make him look cool again, and to sell more toys. If this wasn't a Star Wars movie, and if it existed in a separate or original science fiction universe, I don't think this movie would be nearly as well liked as it is. What's really selling this movie is the knee-jerk happiness of nostalgia, not the story or the characters.
Remember the Rebel base?
I clapped when I saw it.
I clapped when I saw Darth Vader!
ATSTs!
C-3PO and R2-D2 showed up and I clapped!
Oh my God!
Except people are forgetting that these things being in a movie has to actually make sense or have a part in an interesting story. It all feels so weirdly empty. When C-3PO and R2-D2 appeared, it was just nothing. Hey, these guys were in A New Hope, so they can be in Rogue One for 3 seconds too, I guess. The story just grinds to a halt to shove in these awkward references to A New Hope, and none of them are necessary. If they had removed those fan service elements and let Rogue One be its own film, it could have been something really special. Make it a straight up war movie. Go all out with the battles and the losses and show how this war tore across the galaxy. Have a team of run-down, disenfranchised people rise up against their oppressors and go out in a heroic blaze of glory, having assured the rebellion's future victory. Or make it a heist movie where the rebellion has to assemble a team from across the galaxy with specific skills so that they can work together, break into the Death Star, and get the plans. scenes. Action scenes and nostalgically fueled fan service don't make a film complete, and when it's all that a film relies on to be entertaining, it makes everything feel flat. In the end, Rogue One was just a big disappointment, and it kind of makes me nervous about the future spin-offs because even when a Star Wars film tries to stand on its own, it relies almost entirely on what's come before. But that's very likely just a problem with Rogue One. I do hope that the Han Solo spin-off doesn't end up feeling equally as pointless as this film did. I don't think that Rogue One is a terrible movie, but it just couldn't capture that same magic that's such a big part of the original trilogy. It goes way too far over into being dark and serious in the same way that the other prequels went too far over into being light and fun. There needs to be a balance, and that's kind of where the original trilogy sits. If you loved Rogue One, I'm jealous of you. I really wanted to love it, or even enjoy the majority of it. But if you think that Rogue One is the best Star Wars movie ever made, then I don't think you really get why this series works. Rogue One simply doesn't have the same sense of adventure or fun that's so intrinsic to Star Wars. It's a mopey, dull, choppy, bland action movie with a Star Wars paint job. It's a good paint job, but the film ignores so many opportunities for originality and throws in too many references and fan service moments. The Force Awakens worked very well as a Star Wars movie and as a tribute to the overall franchise, and yes, it shamelessly ripped off A New Hope, but at least I felt something when I watched it. Maybe stories like Rogue One should be left to books, or comics, or animated series. In terms of movies, Star Wars isn't really a very complicated or diverse series. Rogue One breaks the formula, but it's not a formula that really needs to be broken. You might enjoy Rogue One as just a movie, and that's cool, but it barely functions as a Star Wars movie. And because this movie was intended to justify the spin-offs as a necessary part of the Star Wars movie universe, it kind of failed. But it also made a bunch of money, so this train isn't stopping anytime soon. I guess we'll still have to wait and see if a really good Star Wars prequel can actually be made. Because God knows, the last time they tried, it didn't work out.